If you want to be a good writer, you need to write a lot. You need a lot of practice. You should also read some style books that will teach you a lot of techniques that will help your writing. But if you want some very concentrated list of techniques that you should implement as you write, things to think about when you're writing, whether it is for practice or for publication, this video is for you. I'm going to discuss today 7 tips about how you should structure your writing that will help you become a better writer. My name is Shai Dotan. I'm Associate Professor of International and Public Law at the University of Copenhagen Faculty of Law. This series of videos is designed to improve your English. The first and the most important rule of writing, the rule that trumps all the other rules that I'm going to mention now, is the following. Every sentence should have a combination of old information and new information. So when you write in a sentence, you want to refer to something that happened in the past sentences. For example, if you wrote a previous sentence about a certain judge, you refer to him as he or she. This pronoun indicates to the reader that there is old information. This is a judge, we've heard about him for 3 sentences before, now we're adding new information on that. So using this pronoun is the easiest way to use old information. You refer to a character, a situation, an event that appeared before by using he, she, it, they, and so on. There are other ways to use old information to new information. You could, for example, speak about this person. So say, this person did, this is a person you spoke about before. The word this refers to something that already happened, or that. That's another way to use old information to new information. And even if you're not using these words, you need to always think how the sentences connect and to make sure that you're referring to the old information before you. That's a classical way. You're basically saying extra things about the same person, event, situation, historical period, place, time. All these things, you add more information and refer back to them. Another way to think about old information to new information is to realize that sentences are also connected through methods of style. So for example, you can refer to a previous sentence by repeating part of it. Think about the most famous example by the speech of Martin Luther King, I have a dream. And he repeats the words, I have a dream. So he's every time referring to different descriptions of his dream about equality in America. And he does this by repeating the same situation, so creating this parallel. You can either repeat part of a sentence or repeat the shape of a sentence. So if you have a series of sentences referring to the same thing, you are still referring to the previous sentences, even if you're not referring to the content. You're showing that it's a list. Sometimes this list is numbered and it's very clear, but even if it's not, the structure of the sentences and repetition of some words make it clear that you are repeating the old information before you get into the new information. So the first and most important rule, always remember sentences connect together by having some old information and some new information. Now, I spoke a lot about old information. The new information is also important. You need to make sure that the sentence goes somewhere. Okay, it's not just repeating things without any purpose. So it's adding new information, adding new things. You describe the judge, what did he do? Which decision did he make? What other information have you to provide us about this judge, but we didn't get before? Once you think about it this way, everything is much easier. So as you're a beginner in writing, every sentence, take it apart and say, what is the old information? I'm referring to the sentences that came before. What is the new information in the sentence? That's a very useful technique to save you from a lot of trouble. The second technique, which is agreed across almost all style experts, is you need to be more active, which means that you're trying to use less of a passive voice and more real verbs. Now, many scholars of writing wrote about it differently. The most coherent is Helen Sword, and she said one of the techniques that you need to adopt is you want to make sure that you're not using so many zombie nouns. What are a zombie noun? It's a noun that is actually working through a verb. So instead of saying, I committed the organization, which sounds funny, adds new words, and doesn't make a lot of sense, you say, I organize. Organize is a clear verb. Organization is a zombie noun. It's a noun but is built by making a verb with ion. So it's something that turns a verb into a noun, but it's not a real noun because you're not talking about it. You're just trying to use it as a replacement for a verb, and that's something that you should try to avoid as much as possible. Now, I say as much as possible because sometimes it is useful to have nouns that operate as verbs. They would not survive in the language if it wasn't for that. Passive voice is not unnecessary, something that Steven Pinker in his book about writing makes very clear. He gives an example which I always use in my class. He says you can say in the newspaper, helicopters were flown in to extinguish the fire. Using the passive voice here, the helicopters were flown in, but it's exactly what you should do, because unless it's a story that is focusing only on the pilots, you don't care about the fact that pilots were flying the helicopters. What you're caring about is what happened to the fire and what happened to the helicopters that were sent to extinguish it. And so here a passive voice is useful. And even zombie nouns or gerunds, so verbs that end in ing, instead of I go, my going there led to certain results, are also sometimes useful, and you can use them. The key is not to overuse them. And that's a mistake that a lot of beginners do. They're afraid to make strong claims. And strong claims are claims that come with real verbs that actually commit an action. And the way to avoid that is often to speak in a more passive voice, use a lot of zombie nouns, and thus to escape making a strong claim. That's exactly what you want to fight against. So as long as you're sure that your sentence have the mix of old information and new information, try to make it more active. And if possible, try to take away the zombie nouns, replace them by real verbs, and work with that. The third recommendation that you should take into account in your writing, once you establish that you have old information, new information, you want to try usually to put the most important piece of information first, because that's what the readers reads first. And you want to make sure that if you are making a claim and you're adding qualifications to the claim, you make the claim first and add qualifications only later. Now, here's a mistake that a lot of beginners do. They would start by qualifying what they're saying and only then say what they're saying. This is part of, Steven Pinker spoke about the curse of knowledge that I'm discussing in previous videos. And the idea was that we tend to assume people already know what we know. So if we know something, we say, you already know that. So we can just add our very sophisticated, very elaborated, complicated complications and qualifications to this first, and afterwards we are going to say it, if at all. And that's not the way it should work, of course. The way it should work is you make a first claim, a strong claim first, and then afterwards you add qualifications later. What I encourage you is to think that you're in a kind of an Israeli talk show where people are speaking to each other very, very fast, and you have to know that somebody may start over speaking you at any moment, and then speak in a way that puts your main ideas first, and any qualifications only later, because if you don't do that, there's always the danger that somebody would just jump into what you're saying and stop you when you've just said the qualifications, not the main claim that you want to make. So the first 3 rules about writing, the ones that should guide you throughout your writing experience, is you focus on all the information to new information every sentence, you try to be more active, and you try to say your main claim first, and then only later qualify it at the end of the sentence. Now, when you go to construct the sentence, it's very important to make sure that the subject of a sentence is able to actually do the verb. So in one of the common recommendations that we find in style books is it has to be clear who is kicking whom. So which one is acting in which way. Now, if you're going to use more real verbs and real nouns instead of using zombie nouns, that's going to be easier for you to see because you have clear verbs that are active and it's easier to use them. But it's still important that you always be sure who is the subject and who is doing the actual action in the sentence. This is something that you need to be very, very aware of. And if you take a sentence, it will be very easy for you to take it apart and say, This is the noun with the subject, and he is committing the verb, and what is the verb, and hopefully it's a clear active verb and it's easy to find. So that's something that is relatively easy to understand and to follow. The second part is you want every part of a sentence to meet to match the sentence that the rest of the sentence that comes later, and that's something that is very important to be aware of. It's more than just having pairs of subjects and verbs. The sentence has to be internally consistent and logical. Always make sure that the pieces of a sentence match. You cannot have disconnected sentences. Sometimes the quick fix for that would be to put a period instead of a comma, for example, because the sentence is broken, or better to just fix it. Because if the sentence is broken in the middle and you don't know where it's going, then the writing is bad, it's not coherent, and you need to fix it. Sometimes it's an easy fix, again, like adding a period. Sometimes it means that you have to rewrite your sentences completely. The final two recommendations are especially important for academics. When you're writing an academic paper or book, it's very important to make sure that you make clear to yourself what is the difference between an argument and evidence. You argue something, this paper argues so and so, and then what is evidence? You're making quantitative evidence, you're making qualitative evidence based on interviews, you're analyzing judgments. Whichever it is, it needs to be clear. And this sounds almost obvious, but it's not that easy to do. Many times when you're in the process of writing, you mix the things that you argue for and the things that are evidence to support what you argue for. And that's something that you need to be very much aware of. So be always careful to make sure for yourself what is something that I'm arguing in this paper and what is the evidence that I provide that is something that I'm sure about. The way to basically provide an argument is you're making an hypothesis, so you're claiming something that you think is true about the world, and then you're testing it continuously. But if you are continuously not sure what is the hypothesis that you're arguing for and what is evidence, then all the process falls apart because you end up assuming things instead of actually arguing for them. So you need to be aware of that. The other thing I want you to be aware of is that if you're making a claim, like an argument, try to provide the support of this claim, the evidence, as quickly as possible. I told you before that imagine that you're in an Israeli talk show. Now I say imagine that you're in a University of Chicago Law School law economics workshop where the best professors around the world, experts in law economics, can barge in at every second of what you're saying and immediately ask you questions. So think about you writing for somebody that is as reactive as that. So you say something, okay, how do you know that? You have to provide support immediately. And that's important, not just that you provide support somewhere in the paper, but it will be immediate. Because if you imagine that you are working with a reader that is very aggressive and reacts immediately every time they don't understand something, every time they want proof for something, then you become a much better writer because you will provide this information to your readers immediately at a time when they need that. And that's exactly what you need to do. If you take these seven rules, the last two are particularly for academics, the first five are for anybody who's writing in prose, and implement them, this will help you to become a better writer. Now, the important part is just to practice, practice, practice. Write a lot, read a lot of style books, read a lot of good books and bad books to learn from the style. Speak, because speaking will also let you improve your writing by matching the sounds of a speech and getting used to them. And all these things together will lead to very, very good writing over a relatively short period of time.